Well, good evening, and I want to thank you for joining me here this evening in Omaha, and to those of you who are joining me in other realms, welcome. I want to stand before you tonight and shed a little bit of light on domestic violence, as it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month right now, and also to share some personal insight as a survivor of domestic violence. A little bit about me. I am currently employed as a crime victim advocate for the Sarpy County Crime Victim Witness Unit, and that is a part of the county attorney's office. I've been an advocate for women's rights and the rights of crime victims for almost 25 years, and I'm fortunate enough to stand here as a daughter, sister, mother, wife, best friend, and co-worker. There are many times when I did not think that possible, as I am also a survivor of trauma and addiction. In speaking this evening, I wanted to start with background and statistics to help you understand not just the type of abuse someone endures, but the impact of it both individually and globally. I find it important that you have that information mulling around so that as I move forward over the next hour, you will not just be listening, but you will hear me. First, when I'm speaking of domestic violence, I am referring to intimate partner domestic violence, someone that was in an intimate relationship versus a family member or relationship shared by a marriage. Second, while the primary topic is about domestic violence, we cannot forget that to a survivor, there is no such thing as just domestic violence. There is a huge overlap of experiences of child abuse and neglect, child sexual abuse, animal abuse, rape and sexual assault, human trafficking, and bullying. It's all trauma. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and according to the Domestic Violence Awareness Project, it evolved from the Day of Unity, held in October of 1981, and conceived by the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. The intent was to connect advocates across the nation who were working to end violence against women and their children. The Day of Unity soon became an entire week, devoted to a range of activities conducted at the local, state, and national levels. The activities conducted were as varied and diverse as the program sponsors, but had these in common. They were mourning those who have died because of domestic violence, celebrating those who have survived, and connecting those who work to end the violence. These three themes remain a key focus today. And in October of 1987, so 30 years ago, the very first Domestic Violence Awareness Month was observed. The same year marked the initiation of the first National Domestic Violence Toll-Free Hotline. In 1989, the U.S. Congress passed Public Law 101 to 112, designating October of that year as National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And such legislation is passed every year. Thanks to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence for leading that effort. And each day, the Day of Unity is celebrated the first Monday of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Out of that awareness grew the purple ribbon. Why purple? Have you ever heard of the Purple Heart? This is given in the military to recognize those wounded in service. For survivors and victims of domestic violence, it represents wounds both physical and emotional, and most importantly, it is a representation of peace, courage, healing, and to honor those who were fatally injured by an intimate partner. Now I'm going to give you some pretty somber statistics. I can't think of too many positive statistics when it comes to domestic violence, but I'll end my presentation this evening with one very notable one. These are statistics from the National Domestic Abuse Hotline. On average, 24 people per minute are victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in the United States. That equates to over 12 million women and men over the course of a year. Nearly 3 in 10 women and 1 in 10 men in the U.S. have experienced these. Think about that. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men aged 18 and older in the United States have been the victim of severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. More than 1 in 3 women and more than 1 in 4 men have experienced rape, physical violence, and/or stalking. Nearly half of all women and men in the United States have experienced psychological aggression by an intimate partner. And females ages 18 to 24, and then in the next subgroup, 25 to 34, typically experience the highest rates of intimate partner violence. And sadly, we are starting to see numbers rise amongst the elderly. Intimate partner violence is the leading cause of female homicide and injury-related deaths during pregnancy. Women who are victims of domestic violence are 8 times more likely to be murdered by their partner if there are firearms in the home. Domestic violence is the 3rd leading cause of homelessness among families. One of the real heartbreakers was published by the Huffington Post back in 2014. The number of American troops killed in Afghanistan and Iraq between 2001 and 2012 was 6,488. The number of American women who were murdered by current or ex-male partners during that same time was 11,766. That's nearly double the amount of casualties lost during war. On average, 3 women in the U.S. are murdered every day by a current or former intimate partner. 72% of murder-suicides are committed by an intimate partner. Think on that for a minute. We are losing our mothers, our daughters, our sisters. And for what? A woman is most likely to be murdered when attempting to leave or having left an abuser. So when you challenge your friends, why don't you leave? Remember this. Less than 25% of incidents of physical abuse and sexual abuse are even reported to law enforcement. Less than 34% of those who are injured will ever seek medical treatment. 1 in 5 children are exposed to domestic violence each year, but more than 90% of those will actually witness the abuse. The economic impact on our communities, I'm going to give you a number, 8 million. The number of days of paid work women lose every year because of the abuse perpetrated against them by current or former partners. This equates to over 32,000 full-time jobs. The cost is over $8 billion a year. Statistics show that between 21 and 60% of victims will actually lose their jobs because of the stalking, the abuse, and the injuries. My own trauma comes in many forms. I have experienced child sexual abuse, domestic abuse, rape, bullying, sex trafficking, and intimate partner domestic violence. But I do not like to think of myself as a statistic, although, as you have just heard, I could probably fit in many of those. And I can't make these up. These are the everyday lives of women and families around us. And as a nation, we have become complacent in our holding offenders accountable, and we have become less and less understanding of the victims and the survivors they leave behind. My father is a Vietnam War veteran, and as many of us know, veterans were not welcomed home with open arms at that time. They were protested against, spit on, and even assaulted. PTSD was not a word in our vocabulary at the time, and so my dad did not talk about his experiences. In order to wake him up, we would have to yell at him from the doorway, because many days he would wake up swinging his arms like he was fighting off the enemy. And with that came trauma. My paternal grandfather was a World War II veteran and an alcoholic and very abusive. He married a Japanese woman shortly after the war, and if you can imagine late 1940s and marrying a Japanese woman, can you imagine how they were treated? My father is the oldest of 4 and the only boy. He was responsible for his younger sisters and would often be beat for missteps. My mother grew up an only child and was shy and insecure. She was raped by a boyfriend as a teen, and while in college she met and married my father, and shortly after quit school and moved with him to a new base. For 25 years she supported and stood by a man who was frequently stationed at bases around the world, including a 9-month period where we lived with her parents while he was stationed in another country. My maternal grandfather was also a World War II veteran, and he and my grandma grew up during the Depression era. My sister, who is 3 years younger than I am, took the brunt of the abuse from my father. After she was born, my dad made it clear that he was disappointed that he had 2 daughters and no sons. We heard this frequently and he would usually blame my mom for not giving him sons. I tried hard to be a boy, though. I was a tomboy. I followed my dad everywhere. I played sports because he liked sports. His favorite teams were my favorite teams. I wanted to show him that even though I was a girl, I could be the son he always wanted. At an early age, I even began to question my identity and struggled with the fact that I had to wear these things they called bras and couldn't master the art of peeing while standing. I still haven't figured it out, although the shiwi is bringing me a lot closer. I wanted to be a boy so bad. When Dad would get mad at my sister or I or Mom, he talked about how when we were old enough, he was going to leave my mom. This was like our family mantra. I grew up a child of the military. My father was in the Air Force, and I was fortunate enough to be able to move around quite a bit. While it made it hard to plant roots anywhere, I felt quite comfortable moving around and was very social. I adapted, or so I thought. I was sexually abused by a family friend at the age of 6, and I told no one. I grew to develop insecurities, had troubles concentrating in school, and had a very skewed sense of self. I did not fit in anywhere. My dad's job sent us overseas, where over the course of those 4 years, I would be sexually assaulted several times by friends. And by 6th grade, I began cutting my arms. I was 10. When we moved to Iowa, I was 12, and I was living in the town my mother grew up in and grandparents still lived and worked in. I'd spent some time there as a toddler, and we'd often stay several weeks during the summer and winter breaks. So I kind of knew a few of my peers, but I still didn't fit in. As I reached my teens, I felt like I was never good enough, and I hated my body. I wanted to fit in. I began to battle my mostly inner demons through junior high and high school. Yeah, I had friends, but I was still alone. I struggled with eating disorders, cutting, gender identity struggles, self-loathing, and a suicide attempt. I did not get invited to parties because I didn't drink. I participated in social clubs, played varsity sports, and was even a cheerleader, but I still felt so awkward in my skin and I didn't fit in. I had boyfriends, but most of those relationships ended when I would not put out. And when I finally did, those relationships soon ended as well, but not the reputation that came with it. By college, I was determined to turn that all around. I was going to be part of the in crowd. I played softball and was a cheerleader. I started an environmental group on campus, and we planted trees for Earth Day. I'm still a tree hugger at heart. I was also on the newspaper staff, which kind of goes against the tree hugging. I was raped the first weekend of college, and I began partying and drinking heavily, and I started using drugs. I taught myself that if I can't fight them off sober and I can't fight them off drunk, I should drink to the point of passing out so I don't have to worry about it. I had sex with just about anyone who would pay attention to me, men, women, it did not matter. And if I wasn't having sex, it was against my consent. I can recall no less than 100 incidents of rape in the first 2 years of college. Most disappointing to me were the times that I would not drink or take enough drugs to pass out, and I knew what was happening to me, and I blamed myself, and so to punish myself, I would cut my arms. Or one time I can remember I punched a mirror in the restroom and smashed my hand with my bed. I still did not fit in. My body was not mine. It was a shell, and I had no control over it. Saying no was never an option. In 95, I moved to Omaha and continued this pattern of self-destruction into my 20s. By 2000, I'd had a string of emotionally abusive relationships and still felt no better about myself. I struggled to find out who I was. In May of 2000, at the age of 26, I was transferred to Kansas for my job. This would be the furthest I had ever lived from my family and friends, and it was there that I met a guy. He worked in the same building I did and had close ties to law enforcement. He trained in defense tactics, and his closest friends were in law enforcement. It should also be noted here that he had a gun, he said, for protection, given that in 2000, this particular city had one of the highest rates of crime per capita in the U.S. And at his job, he carried handcuffs and OC, or most commonly known as pepper spray, and a baton, and never shied away from an opportunity to display his skills in any of those. It was common practice for him to take his gun out and clean it in front of me. Barrel was usually pointed in my direction. He never had to say a word. After about 6 weeks of him pursuing me, we went on our first date, and it seemed like a dream date. A concert, talking in the park, a long walk, and it was amazing. And it was so romantic. And then the next day he moved in, and he told me he loved me. Shortly after that, things changed. He wanted to be with me all the time. So much, in fact, that he managed to break into my email account and send an email to all of my friends and family saying that I had met a wonderful man and I no longer needed anyone else in my life. And then he deleted all their information, and he told me that he loved me. Then began the beatings. During one such episode, my cell phone was broken and I needed to get a new one. He took me to the phone company and we got a new phone. We were now on a shared plan, and he had access to all the information regarding the incoming and outgoing calls. But he said he loved me. The beatings became daily. He never hit me in places that could be seen by others. He took a knife and shredded a bunch of my clothing. He had me followed whenever he was not around. He had background checks run on myself and all of my friends. I could not call or visit my family if he was not there. I went from being an outgoing and friendly person to an isolated and worried person. After every beating, he would have me get in his car and he would drive around out in the country, saying he didn't want anyone to call the cops, knowing that they would never come. And if they did, it would be his friends. It was during these drives where I would frequently try to get away by jumping out of the moving car. He quickly stopped that by speeding as fast as he could, making it harder to jump. And he would tell me that he loved me. He suggested we put our money together because it would be easier to do bills together. So we got a joint checking account, and every payday he began to take all the money out and would spend it at strip clubs or on renting porn. This is when I realized he had a strong addiction to porn. Sex became about role-playing or reenacting what we saw in a porn video. Our weekend dates became trips to the strip clubs and sex shops around town, and in order to earn my money back, I would have to perform for him. When that was not enough, I had to start turning tricks, performing for others. We would travel to strip clubs and sex shops along the interstate, and he would force me to have sex with him while others watched. Watch him have sex with others? Or I would have to have sex with others while he watched, and then I could pay my rent. But he told me he loved me. I was not bound by physical chains, and I was not locked in a home. My prison was a psychological and emotional one. The physical beatings were secondary to all of that. The first time he ever hit me in my face, I felt trapped, and I cut my arm so deep I had to go to the ER. While there, nobody asked me about what led up to the cutting, but they worried that I was suicidal, and that became their focus. I was not. I just wanted away. But I could not tell them that because he was in the room with me the whole time. He told me he loved me. I awoke one day in the most excruciating pain I've ever felt, and he took me to the ER and stood by my side. The doctor gave me an exam and then gave me a pamphlet. And I knew what it meant when I got home. It meant that I was going to get a severe beating. But he told me he loved me. And a few months later, his job transferred him to Omaha, and I stayed in Kansas. Then September 11th, 2001 happened. And I remember being on the phone with my mom and watching the towers fall. Even though this happened half a country away, I knew that I missed my family and wanted to be closer to them. I moved back to Omaha after several months, and we got engaged. But the violence did not stop. The difference to me was that I was closer to my family and friends, and I was no longer isolated and alone. I finally found a way to escape. His job was transferring him to another state on the East Coast, and I did not want to go. And I told him no. It was the first time I'd ever said no. I knew that with the violence escalating, if I moved, the next time my family would see me in a body bag, and I was not ready to die. The last morning before he moved, I awoke to him strangling me and shouting that he loved me, and if he could not have me, nobody could. I thought, this cannot be the day that I die. He began smashing everything in the apartment, and I was able to get out and left for work. I called my mom, and along with my sister, grandmother, and several of my mom's coworkers, we were able to get my things moved out. That was July 26, 2002. He did not love me. I do not share my story in order to shock you or frighten you. I do not ask for pity or sympathy because I am not broken and I am not weak. But I am asking for you to help end this violence. There is nothing my family or anyone could have done different to get me out at the time. Sure, they tried, but I was too afraid. I was afraid of him, afraid of myself, and mostly afraid of the future, the unknown. In order to save me, you would have had to go back generations, back to where my grandparents' traumas began, and how with each generation that trauma is passed on, whether we realize that or not. Today I stand before you, not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as an advocate for change, an advocate for those who cannot speak their truth and share their story. And it is my hope in sharing just one small part of my life story that you leave open to listening to others as they share their story and realize how this can and does happen. And we just have to open our eyes, ears, and hearts and realize that you are a part of the solution. There are many of us survivors around. Some will choose to remain silent. Some have no choice but to remain silent. But we are here. We have been hurt and wounded, but we are not ruined. I've been advocating for women and children over 25 years, for myself about 10, and I've only been speaking up about my own experiences about 4 years now. That's a lot of silence. I'm here because I cannot stay silent, and I expect change. I have learned that if change is to happen, I have to make it happen, and I am. I have beautiful tattoos that cover the scars from the past, the physical and emotional ones. I've replaced pain and hurt with love and beauty. When you see someone covered in ink, there's a story for each of and every one of them. Some are reminders of the pain, some are celebrating the joys, but you cannot truly judge a book by its cover or a human by their skin. You have to look beneath the surface. I did not call a hotline or visit an agency. Yes, those services existed, but I did not feel that I could call them. For one, it was not safe for me to. And I definitely did not call the police. He made it very clear that that was not even an option. I did not call my family and directly ask for help, but it was no secret what was happening. The warning signs were all around. The abuse was not so hidden. I no longer struggle with addiction. I've been in recovery from addiction for a little over 16 years, and I have not cut myself since that day in 2001. I still struggle with the insecurities and self-doubt. I live with PTSD, anxiety, and depression, and battle them sometimes every day. Even standing here and sharing a part of me has been extremely difficult, and trying not to worry if you are judging me or if I have said something wrong is a real struggle, right? Not judging. But I can't give in to those, and I push through. My grandparents' and parents' trauma became my trauma because you did not talk about it. There was little support in the way of services or prevention. Abuse was behind closed doors. Depression and other mental health struggles were done in silence. And in silencing those who struggle, we keep the cycles going and growing. I challenge each and every one of you to go home, tell your families, friends, neighbors, and coworkers about what you have heard. We have to work together to end the abuse of women and children. Be aware of what is happening around you. You can no longer hide behind the comfort of ignorance, doubt, and disbelief. I'm standing here in front of you to show you that this is real. I am real. I am your family, your friend, your neighbor, and your coworker. We are humans, not data points or objects. For every one of me speaking out, there are hundreds, thousands, even millions who cannot. I do want to share a little something with you that I wrote several years ago that to me is my call of action to everyone. I'm not a victim. I am not a survivor. I'm not a statistic. I am a fighter. I'm fighting for my mother, my sister, and my daughter, and I fight for me. I'm fighting for your mother, your sister, and your daughter. I fight for you. This is a call to everyone. If we want change, we have to make changes. First, we change from within. We must love ourselves, we must respect ourselves, and we cannot expect others to do these if we don't do them first. We must love our sisters and respect our sisters. We cannot expect others to do these if we don't do them first. Then we can go into the world and change it, and it starts with one, you. I'm not asking for a lot. I'm not asking for money or prayers. I'm asking for action. I'm asking that we stop allowing the women and children in our communities to become victims of one of the most vile and atrocious of crimes committed against another human being. I'm asking that we stand up and say no more. We need advocates, and we need to advocate. We need to hold our sister's hands and walk with her and hold her high. She's not a victim. She's not a survivor. She's not a statistic. She is a fighter. We can prevent rape and abuse in our communities by not blaming the victims, but by believing when they say, "This has happened to me." We listen, we support, and we fight. We can prevent rape and abuse in our communities by holding offenders accountable. We do this through advocacy in the courts and changing legislation. We listen, we support, we fight. We can prevent rape and abuse in our communities by teaching our children self-respect and respect of others. We do this through accurate sexuality education in the home and in the schools. We do this by showing what healthy relationships with ourselves and others look like. We listen, we support, we fight. We can prevent rape and abuse in our communities by sharing our stories and not remaining silent. We are not to blame. We listen, we support, we fight. The vagina is sacred. My body is sacred. You do not own it. It is not yours, and it is not yours to abuse. It is not yours to sell, and you cannot have what is not freely given. It belongs to me. I leave you with the best part. Remember that statistic I was telling you about? Just wanted you to know that I am safe. I have a wonderful support system in place and some of the best friends, family, and coworkers I could have ever imagined. I found myself in my place, and some days are better than others, but I am right where I need to be. Next Friday, I celebrate 10 years of marriage to my partner, and next month, I celebrate 6 years of being a mom. I am raising the next generation of fierce warriors, so watch out, world. I have learned to love myself and accept all of my quirks, and I was able to break that cycle. There is hope, and there is a way. To the survivors in the room, I stand with you. You are not alone, and I hear you. If you or someone you know is needing resources, information, or seeking safety from domestic abuse, you can call your local crisis hotline or the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-7233. Thank you very much. Good evening.